Yeah.
All right, you're live.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to the House Committee on General and Housing. Today is still Thursday, the 20th of February. And this afternoon, we're going to hear first from our Cameron Wood, our legislative counsel, for a walkthrough of the next draft of our committee bill. So Cameron, I think you know everybody in the room, at least sitting around this table, and you should talk to us. We have the latest version, and for those who are online watching, it is Magali, right? It is online.
Yes, it is posted.
Right. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen. Zoomed in good? Perfect. For the record, Cameron Wood, Legislative Counsel. Good afternoon. Welcome back for the afternoon session of your House Committee bill. I have version 2.1, so slightly different than the version that we walked through yesterday morning. What I've done is I have highlighted you'll still see the highlights in the section numbers and highlights in some of the reader assistance headings, again, just to clarify areas that are not covered by me. But most of the highlight you'll see is the language that I've added to this version, different from what we discussed yesterday.
So you've highlighted differences from yesterday?
Yes.
On what color?
Yellow. Absent the subject and title and purpose statement here on page 1, anything that's highlighted yellow is what's been added since yesterday morning. And so forgive me, I'm going to scroll and jump to it. And I will just comment on the reader assistance settings as we move through again. So we have the rental housing improvement program changes. There were some questions about this and the manufactured home repair program. I'm supposed to be meeting with the Department of Housing and Community Development this afternoon to kind of walk through some of the questions that we discussed yesterday. So hopefully we'll have some information to share back, tomorrow.
And they'll also be in tomorrow.
Perfect. Perfect.
So what's happening here, members of the committee, is when you guys raise a question about, well, what does this mean? Does this mean that what happens if the mother-in-law, remember, if there's a mother-in-law unit, and how does that play out? There are really two avenues open to us. One is, I guess, the simplest is our lawyer calls the agency and says, what did you mean here? What's the intent? And maybe nothing has to change when the question is answered, or even maybe something should change. And since the bill is here, he could just change it and tell us. Another option, which is only, I think, if the ambiguity greater, is we get the agency back in here and ask them the question ourselves. Go ahead.
And I do think it will be important for you also to ask them, especially if they're going to be here tomorrow, so you can get your questions answered directly from them, so you're not potentially hearing a mistranslation. But I did want to discuss with them a few other questions as well. So I was going to take the questions back and discuss with them this afternoon. So again, just kind of scrolling through, we have the manufactured home improvement and repair programs here. I haven't made any changes to these sections based on our conversation yesterday morning. We have the infrastructure sustainability fund.
Excuse me for interrupting. One of the major questions having to do with the MER, the manufactured home improvement, was why do we all remember that there's already a program?
Right.
Did you find anything out?
That's one of the questions I'll be asking DHCD
This afternoon. Okay. All
So
right.
we have the infrastructure sustainability fund. We're on page 7 at this point, just kind of scrolling through. Again, I have not made any changes to this section since our conversation from yesterday. And we have the tax department housing data access. This is from page 10. No changes to this section. Page 11, statewide rental housing registry. I know there was a lot of conversation about this yesterday. I have not made any changes, so I didn't have any direction from the committee regarding that piece. So those two sections are still here.
I think, Magali, on
Yes.
that, I don't know if I don't know if you were privy to, there's been discussion in the committee, amongst committee members, that the tax department collects considerable data on an annual basis from landlords. They file a form. And the question was, I guess, two questions. One is, what's in the form compared to what's asked for in this rental registry? And the second, more important, was what would it take? Is that form already shared with DHCD? And if it is shared, is there some part of it that isn't shared? And if it is all shared, what is DHCD missing? And the reason this inquiry is important is if we can get 80 or 90% of what the rental registry would do just by working with what we've got, that's, would be definitely something worth considering. So in order to do that, we have talked about having someone from the tax department come in. Has anyone talked to you about that, Magali?
Yes, Jill Remick from the tax department will be coming in next Tuesday to testify on the CAMA database. And she is currently finding the subject area expert in the department to testify on the landlord certificate.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to leave this as is for now.
Yeah.
Realizing that there's differences amongst, well, I suspect there are differences amongst us, but I think that it's definitely worth looking into what is the information that we already collect. I would really love to find a way. I mean, this has been a lightning rod. It's been controversial. The governor has said he doesn't like it. So the question is, do we really, can we find a way of just getting what we need without a lot more hassle? That's the question.
I think, in conversations with others, so I think it might be a good idea to bring in maybe DHCD, because that's kind of who DHFA contracts through to get the data. That's
Right.
that comes from the tax department to them, to them. And the answer is they do get the data, and it's every 5 years for the housing needs assessment, and then ongoing as well. They get the information, and the language in Act 81 last year was just basically clarifying that they are supposed to be getting that data. It's okay. That's why the language is in there. But it had been happening.
So we could have DHCD in here and ask them, why isn't this enough?
Yeah, I just suggested that maybe somebody from the tax department and DHCD give us the story behind it, because in working with the tax department, there's some concerns about changing that form or doing that kind of
So
stuff.
Magali, when we have testimony from the tax department, it might be good if we could figure out who at DHCD is the person who owns the data needs and with whom the information is shared. You have a question?
A comment,
Yeah.
a thought. Rob Parsons and I spent 6 meetings over the fall, not summer, on our landlord tenant committee. I'm not personally ready to just discard this, so I would like to take some time with this piece. And if it doesn't happen this way, I would like to find a path at I am committed to the needs of this, and my community has it already. But I would like to speak to my thoughts on why this is necessary, so I would like to take some time on this piece and not scrap it. And so I'm open to different ideas of how that comes about, but I'm absolutely not willing to just throw it away at this point.
I
Mary
think-
has her hand up.
Mary, go ahead.
I think this was discussed previously. And I'm not sure if my colleagues remember this from last year, but I can't remember exactly what the reason was they couldn't or wouldn't do it. I don't know if it had anything to do with, a computer program or I can't remember exactly, but I do remember talking about this previously and how important it was to have a registry. We learned from Hurricane Irene that we need to know where people are living. It was such a huge problem back then. So I agree with Representative Krasnow that I think we should, keep this in mind and get the answers as to why it couldn't be done last time. Thank you.
I was just gonna clarify, I think were the concerns, I think there were the three issues were consent. It was the software and the cost of the software, or the cost of the software or the people to formulate that. But I think that was the nature of the conversation, was that yes, the data is being collected, but it's a matter of consent to access to that data and the software to where it will be stored or aggregated through, and the cost associated with that. I think that was the nature of the conversation.
Yeah, I would say my memory was that it was about turning what's supposed to be a private document between the landlord and the tax agency into a forward-facing list for the public.
Well, I think at the moment, any other comments on this?
Can I just
Go ahead.
very
Yeah.
quickly, I know that in the report that came out of the committee, the what was it called? Landlord Tenant Law Study Committee, on page 12 of that report is a discussion of the rental registry and kind of it looks like on the one hand, there doesn't seem to be a statewide rental registry.
There is.
No.
And there are many cities that have done it in the country. And I think one of the things that we haven't brought up yet in terms of a potential benefit is in kind of being able to identify processes that are starting to happen that can affect affordability, like, private equity companies buying up all of the apartments, like outlier, terrible landlords and patterns that could be more easily identified when you have more information than just like numbers of units, names of the owners. So I just don't want to lose sight of those other policy benefits that can arise, but understand also that it's never been done statewide yet, and there might be reasons for that.
Any other?
Yeah, and I also recognize that there's a different makeup of the legislature now. And so I want to be conscious of that too, and the time we spend in committee on things. So I guess for now, I would say we'll revisit it with a bit of testimony and hear the most up-to-date information for the committee from the witnesses. But so we'll just kind of put a pin in it if that works for people.
I think that's what we're doing. I
Great.
agree. We're leaving this.
But not scrap.
We're leaving this text in for now.
Yep.
And in the meantime, we're exploring what we already have access to, or do we have access to it?
Perfect.
And what's missing and et cetera.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering, so I think we need more than the tax person. We're probably going to need someone from DHCD. Okay, and we'll have to figure out who that is.
And
Sounds
again, they'll be here tomorrow. So if Commissioner Farrell can't speak to it, I'm sure he can point in the right direction.
Okay, and someone will help me remember to ask him. Someone?
I got you.
Put it on my note list.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
I will,
Proceed.
Thank
I'll
you.
also mention it to them this afternoon.
Mhm.
So hopefully they will be aware that your question will be coming.
Right.
Okay. So we're back on page 14. So again, we just, as a reminder, those two sections, the rental registry and the rental fee were there, but on page 14, line 10, you had sales and use tax exemption. My colleague Kirby Keaton, who covers tax and other issues for legislative council, I believe he's intending to join you shortly around 2 o'clock. He's going to come in and I think walk through some language from Rep. Hardley and just kind of talk with the committee about what some thoughts or ideas are here. If you choose to move forward with something exempting, development of housing in some capacity from sales and use.
This is an exemption from sales and use tax.
Yes, sir.
For construction materials when you're building housing?
And it currently does not have the affordable housing language. I just didn't want Cameron to have to, build from scratch. But it's a Kirby's way.
Okay, so now we're moving into the next section where there's actually really some language here for you to actually review. So this is, and the reader assistance heading is here. It's the VHFA First Generation Homebuyer Program and Down Payment Assistance Program. So we are amending Title 32. So
What page are you on?
this is page 14, beginning line 12. So we have the reader assistance heading here where we're going to be talking about first generation home buyer and down payment assistance.
Okay, all right.
And so then we're in the highlighted language here where we're amending Title 32. And we're dealing with the section associated with the tax credits that VHFA can issue for certain housing development programs. I will highlight that these tax credits and how they work is extremely complicated. I'm only scratching the surface of how this works. So I believe VHFA has been in here and discussed with you and kind of provided an overview of how these processes work. If you have technical questions about it, I would probably defer you to have them come back in and answer those questions. But the language is really straightforward. We have two programs. So in the sub G, we're moving on to page 15 now. We're adding a subsection C, so giving them the authority to issue up to $250,000 in tax credits per year, up to 1.25 million for first-time home buyers. So these are grants to first-time home buyers who are also first-generation home buyers. And then the next section would be moving down to the next page into subsection H. And on page 16, line 7, adding in fiscal year 2027 through fiscal year 2031, they may award up to $250,000 in total first year credit allocations for loans for the down payment assistance program. And so as you can see here, I've kept the previous language. So we're just mirroring it here. So they currently operate this program. This is for the down payment assistance program. Currently operated from fiscal year 2020 through 2026. They're asking essentially to extend it, but we're adding it as a new subsection here to give them an additional authority of $250,000 for those years.
A question. Is there any reason that you repeat it twice rather than just changing 2026 to 31?
It's a question that I'm going to ask our editors. I mentioned that to VHFA when we spoke about it initially, and I said, it just appears that amending this to go out to 2031 probably makes more sense. There was a little bit of concern just in the it was a hallway conversation, so a little bit of concern about maybe having it as a separate section just to identify it as the thing I would want to double check and ask them is some of these programs have an aggregate limit, right? So you know, like in the other program, it's, you know, 250,000 a year to an aggregate limit of 1.25. So I didn't want to just off the top amend the other section. If that wasn't going to subsequently increase their aggregate limit, then it may not be.
It will.
So, that's why we repeated the language, but it is a question that we will get an answer to.
Okay, so I'd like some advice from the committee on this. As you may remember from Maura's testimony, one option, she really presented two options. You remember this applied to first-time homeowners and first-generation home buyers. Okay. The difference being, and I'm sure I'm not 100% accurate here, but more or less, if you're really first gen, your parents can't have owned a home.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and one of the advantages of all these programs that Maura testified to was that they happen to hit people of limited means and often of color, people of color. Okay. So one option, remember there was it's not available to you if you have more than $30,000 in assets and stuff like that. So anyway, so one option was to do what this language does, which is just extended through 31 through 31.
This is the down payment.
Right, yeah, and so that would, she said, allow them to continue the program at about as it is moving forward. The second thing she testified to is if you simply take any limit off and allow the tax credit to go on indefinitely, there's enough money in the program for them to do something else, which is offer a $10,000 grant, not a loan. You see, this down payment assistance of the loan that is paid back. I think it's a zero interest loan.
I believe so. And I think it's paid back when either they
It's paid back
refinance or when
when
they.
refinance or sold, which is great. But they also could provide a $10,000 grant, outright grant for down payment assistance, I think, or to write down the price of the house or whatever to first generation home buyers. And that was the second option. So my question to the committee is, would you like Ledge Council to draft as an alternative option the second option so that we can consider both when we finally talk about the section? In other words, right now, it's just enough, since it's only 5 years, it keeps the current program going. It doesn't add the $10,000 grant for first generation home buyers. And she, advocated that.
I'm sorry, Chairman Hunt. I thought that grant program, isn't that what they're talking about on page 15, lines 9 through 13? $250,000 in first year credit allocations for grants to first time home buyers who are also first gen.
Yeah, I think so.
So there is already a separate language and
So both of them, they're both written.
Are they both already here? Because she told me that if it wasn't fit to pay for it, they'd have to take the limit off of let me just look at the language again.
Yep.
So there's new language for grants for first time who are also first gen. Okay. I thought she told me that.
with
they
a
pay for
limit
that.
of 1.25 over.
In 15, fiscal year 26, allocated. No, that's not it.
What line is it?
So it's page 15 of the new draft,
That's there,
2.1,
you're right.
page
You're right,
15,
it's
lines
there.
9
We're
through
good, we're
13.
good.
Yeah, it's there, but my question is, in fiscal, okay, you know what you have to do? I think,
Is
but I
the
could be
mistake the
wrong.
1.25 over 5, because that keeps
I
one of them
think
keeps feeding into each
they-
other
they
and the other one
keep-
does
yeah,
not.
I think you better check with them. whether they could run the program, the first generation program, that in paragraph, whatever, C. It's on page 15, C, whether they could run that, given the language that you've got at the end on page 16 in 3. Because my memory is they couldn't. They need it to be without end.
I will check with them. This language came directly from them.
I know.
So both, having both of them in there,
Okay,
but I'd be happy to have a
You
conversation
just
with them
double check
again.
with them.
Yeah.
That's,
Also, Laura will be here tomorrow.
okay, great.
Perfect.
Okay, we put that on the list too, right? Someone help my mind, my we.
This is some incredible scheduling, I must say. Everyone we need is gonna be here tomorrow.
Magic. Bring all your questions and sustenance to get us through it.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Go on.
We are back to page 16. So we're moving into the next section. This is line 11. So if you all recall, we talked yesterday about drafting something requiring the Department of Housing and Community Development to come back with information on how to actually implement a land bank here, for the state. So I just drafted this up and inserted it. So I'm going to walk through it with you here because we haven't reviewed it yet. It says on or before November 15th, 2025. I pulled that date because that is, kind of coincides with the potential discussion amongst the appeals study committee, but that can be moved. It has the Department of Housing and Community Development issuing a report to this committee and the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, outlining a legal framework for implementation of a state land bank. The report shall include proposed legislative language specific to the creation of a state land bank and identified funding proposals to support the sustainability of the land bank. I will comment to the committee. It's another thing that you may want to bring up to the Department of Housing and Community Development. They've just done the report. The report was intended to also include legislative language. So I tried to be very specific here that this report shall include legislative language. But just to make sure the department is aware of your intention that they come back with the full legislative language intended to advise you all in how to implement legislation to create a land bank. I think the report, I read it, it has a lot of great information, kind of gives the legislature some things to contemplate as you move forward. But if you're looking for actual, bring us something that we can work off of, make sure that the department is aware of that. I've tried to articulate it here.
Comments from the committee. Is the committee aware that, I just want to make sure people are aware. So this report came out about 2 weeks ago. And one of the concerns that a lot of people have expressed, although I don't think we've heard much testimony, it's just been obliquely referred to a few times, is that there are a surprisingly substantial number of homes in Vermont that are vacant, simply vacant and deteriorating. And the question is what to do about that. And one of the major recommendations in this report was a land bank, which could acquire those houses, obviously, rather as an alternative, they're just falling apart. And then offer them in some way for development. And how that would be funded and what it looks like is, there's some discussion of it in the report, which I admit to having read once quickly, like everything else I'm reading these days. And it was enough to show us that it would be very difficult in the next 10 days or 2 weeks to really put together an actual piece of legislation. And so we decided that as a start, this would reflect that start, which is ask DHCD to really concretize it into what legislation would look like and what the funding source would be. So that's where this is. And I just want to know if we can proceed just at this point with this kind of an approach, which doesn't go further than ask DHCD to concretize it. Yes,
This may be a silly question.
I doubt it.
What is the difference between a land bank and a land trust?
Good question. He's
You look like we're gearing up to answer.
Okay. A land trust, most land trusts are devoted to acquiring interest in real property in order to preserve the property from development,
Okay,
long term.
right,
A land bank is a funding device to acquire property. It's usually in the housing context. And is used to acquire property,
so similar acquisition, different uses.
different use, yeah.
Okay,
And the other one preserves it in perpetuity.
Yeah.
yes, okay, thank you.
I think that, I don't know, it's Chris here. Here.
Chris?
He's right there.
Chris Donnelly, do you have enough to say on this that you should introduce yourself and say?
Anything he says.
No, I think you captured it.
But the Champlain Housing Trust is a form of,
Chris Donnelly, the Champlain Housing Trust. We are a community land trust. So we are a land trust which holds property in perpetuity for the purposes of fulfilling our mission of providing affordable housing or other kind of community assets. A land bank is a mechanism to acquire property for another purpose. And it may be for a community land trust to use, or maybe for a private developer to use. If, to ensure that we secure that property for a use in the future.
Thanks.
so it could be, for example, whereas the Champlain Housing Trust, which by the is about the largest in the country, right?
Oh,
The Champlain Housing Trust owns these properties in order to provide affordable housing. The land bank could flip them. It could acquire them, secure them, and find a developer for them
Okay.
and flip them.
Yeah.
Yes.
thank you.
Is the land trust nonprofit?
I think all of these organizations are nonprofit.
Are you thinking a statewide land bank or a local based
Yes.
affordability? I mean,
Yeah.
possibility for a local.
I think that the question of whether we would have one statewide organization or whether we would have one statewide organization that could in turn help finance local organizations is a question they would have to answer in this report.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that nationally, for example, there's national legislation on green banks. And
Yeah.
it turns out that they didn't create one national green bank. They used the funding capabilities to empower and create locals. So I don't know. It could go either way. Any other questions or thoughts by the committee? Joe?
No, I'll leave it alone. I'll ask. Yeah, I'll leave this alone.
I've got a question.
Oh, good.
The main example was finance, this is in the report, was finance from tipping fees. And it's hard for me to imagine that would produce the kind of money.
I was thinking of the report doing my homework for me, but I'm not gonna ask of that.
Why not?
What's that?
Why not?
Because I can do my own homework. I'm just curious how all the other states fund theirs and like bullet points of like how they run it.
Yeah, I think that that's
But I can also
actually,
look at that
we are
myself.
going to have some testimony on this. And one of the people who are going to testify is a man from Michigan who helped create the trust in Maine. The bank in
Yes.
Maine, and thank you, and the bank in Maine, and was instrumental in this report. So maybe when that testimony, we can go a little further.
I will say too, just to plug the report, I knew nothing about of the land bank was when I read it, and I think that the department did and you know, all individuals who contributed to it, I think did a pretty good job of explaining what its what its purpose is and giving some examples of how it could have benefited some circumstances in Vermont if the state had one. So I think the report did a pretty good job with that.
I've got a question.
Please.
In this bill, it says outlining a framework for implementation of a state land bank. So unless it, and then it goes on to say specific to the creation of a capital S state land bank. And so what I'm asking is, so regardless of at what level the bank could be accessed, it would still be a statewide land bank? And if not, we should specify in the bill that what levels we want explored.
So I will say, just on the language that you have in front of you, is I drafted it with the thought, and I assume that the department will read it and interpret it to mean legislation for a state land bank, state capital meaning state of Vermont,
Yep.
not regional or local. And so if you want to include that, I'm happy to add it if the committee would like, but we could amend it to say legislation related to a state land bank or authorization for the creation of regional land banks. But I'm just to kind of answer the question.
Well, I
I
guess,
drafted it that way, and if I were them, I'd come back with just the thought of here's a state land bank,
Right.
and nothing else.
so I mean, if we're just studying it,
They can make a
Then-
recommendation for regional when they do the study. There's nothing precluding them from recommending that.
it's true, but that does specify state land bank.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Well, it says,
specify
"Shall
any,
include."
Well, I don't see any problem with state. Is there a problem with just saying state and or regional land banks?
I don't think there's a problem with it. No, I think to the point you're making it. My advice to you all as a committee and in your legislation, if you're wanting them to do something, you need to be specific. Having been on the administration
Yeah.
side, it can be challenging to interpret something that's not there. And so if it's not in here to say, or regional or local or some other capacity, I don't know that they're gonna go to the effort to do that.
no, you have to be specific to the letter, I think.
Mike, however we phrase it, I would want to ensure that it is accessible to all of the communities in the state. So rather than having a state that will then help local agencies get established, I want to know the whole state's covered from the word, because a lot of these little towns, like we've seen before, don't have the capacity to stand up a local organization, another local organization. So just to ensure that the smaller communities have the same access to something like this. Somehow in the language, make it clear that the intention is for statewide coverage. In one form or another.
So what I would,
Makes some sense.
it makes sense. What I would say back to the committee is, I think you can do this a few different ways. You could say, bring us legislation about how to establish a state land bank, and then it's at the state level and it's going to operate at the state level. You could say, state, and you could have them come back with two options. Say, we want state legislation that's going to authorize the implementation of a state land bank, and separate from that, legislation that would authorize the creation of, regional land banks, which I would see as two totally separate things. They could potentially go together or exist together, but if you're wanting specific legislation and direction of how to do this from the department, I think you would want to ask for those two things.
Well, how about this? I'm gonna propose something. I'm gonna put it on you. How about you redraft this just a little bit, such that it's clear that they are to study a state land bank or regional land bank approaches such that where such approaches make the benefits of the bank available to all areas of the state. And then a separate sentence on funding. Okay, that way, the reason I say that is really, I think, without knowing, my experience leads me to believe that when you have a statewide land bank, and then you have, they can empower or fund or help local land banks. That it's not an either or, it's a symbiotic relationship. And that because there are areas of the state that already have mechanisms somewhat like this. For example, you heard one here. Remember in Burlington, they have a land bank that is funded by the charge on short-term rentals. And so whatever we do, we wouldn't want to screw up what's going on in Burlington and want to help it. So whatever we're going to do is going to have to make sure that it works well as a hybrid. And I'm just suggesting, though, that pursuant to your warning, we make that all very clear, including what Tom said, which is that whatever, it has to serve the whole state. In other words, we're not just talking about enabling language, which would just say anybody who wants to do it can do it. How's that?
Good, excellent. I'm with you.
Are you okay, Tom? All right.
Okay.
But I was just uncomfortable with
Right.
it only being at the state level and not having a local interpretation.
Right, and not-
Not only is this committee afflicted with a lawyer, it's also afflicted with several honorary lawyers.
Believe in me.
All right, go ahead.
We are back. So we've walked through the land bank section there with some comments and we'll take back to kind of redraft that a little bit. So I'm going to skip ahead to the next section that is amended. I will highlight quickly though, there was a section in draft 1.1 right after the land bank that was the downtown tax credit. And I removed that section at the recommendation of the chair, given that I believe it is in other vehicles moving through the body. So
The land bank, what I discovered, I keep discovering as I'm learning this job, that there are things that I just put in here or we put in here because, hey, it has to do with housing. But actually, it's another committee that's working on it. In this case, again, the Commerce Committee. However, that doesn't mean you can't put it in our letter to approach, saying we like this. And in fact, I hope to draft the letter ASAP, so maybe we can at least begin talking about it very soon.
So are you saying that we're gonna cross off this, that we're not keeping section? Because Commerce is doing
Which one?
the land bank?
No,
Is that what you
no.
just-
No.
Appeals.
No.
I thought I was downtown.
downtown village.
From the original version, he took it out.
Downtown village tax.
Not
All the way to page
Back in the room. Thank you. All right.
Okay. No, I was just highlighting, there was one section there that was removed. Okay, so now for everyone's awareness, I'm jumping all the way to page 28.
Thank you for that announcement.
Because everything there I have not touched because that is Ellen's area and I know she will be in here to talk to you about that in the coming days. So page 28, another section that I removed from draft 1.1, there was a little reader assistance heading that said assessments. I removed that. Similarly, as the chair mentioned, that is being kind of discussed in the House Commerce Committee. So I'm just highlighting for you all, for those watching from home, that has been removed. So brownfields, as I mentioned yesterday, there have been
To throw a monkey wrench into this, I think we just have to check. I know that they're going to do the tax increment financing work. I know that Commerce is going to do tax abatement. I don't know that they are doing assessments. So, but that's okay. Let me find out. Do you?
My recollection of that conversation is that we were gonna make it a three-pronged approach.
Right.
And both tax abatement and tax assessment was gonna be put into the HIT language.
You can just put it all into one bill.
That was my understanding, but
Okay.
I could have. been
We'll
making
just,
that.
let's leave it out and we'll double check
Okay,
who's doing what. Okay.
Just highlighting for you in this draft, it's not there. If you're asking, if you're doing a little compare and keeping me honest, why was it in this one and not in this one? I'm highlighting it for you. So again, we are on page 28. The brownfield section is still empty. Our legal counsel has been in conversation with A&R about the language that they had provided, so it's simply not here yet.
And I sent to you the language that they proposed, but some of the language I don't think should be in our bill. In other words, as I remember, there were 4 paragraphs to their language. And one of the paragraphs essentially allowed a certain development to move dirt that was contaminated from their property to another property. Problem with that is I see that as it doesn't only, it's not limited to housing in any way. It's probably would be most used, I would think, with commercial properties. But it also squarely lands in environment. The other ones, or the other 3 proposals are sufficiently focused on housing, like we heard the things we heard this morning from Matt Chapman that were focused on housing. Those are the ones that I think it would be good if we could put in here. The ones that, focus on housing.
Okay.
I mean, we may hear, I'll look again more carefully at the language, but you have it now.
We have it, and again, our legal counsel, Michael O'Grady, has been already in communication with A&R about it, to work out.
You remember to talk to Michael and tell him that in this bill, we're concerned with things that really relate to housing. If he thinks, well, yeah, this section does too, well then, okay.
I will relay that message from the committee. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so we're moving into the appropriations section, which we very quickly went through yesterday. So I'll just hit highlights again, just, because again, we kind of walked through it quickly. So just to review one more time. We have here 250,000 to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency in order for the agency to implement the recommendations in the report that was issued just a few weeks ago, I believe. The report is labeled Opportunities to Utilize Offsite Construction to Meet Vermont's Housing, Workforce, and Climate Goals. It was issued January 9th, date's right in front of me. So there were a few recommendations coming out of that report, and this would be 250,000 to them to then subsequently move those forward and implement them. And I believe you about that. In subsection 2, this was the funds that were going to the Vermont State Colleges system to help develop new kind of workforce development programs. Initially, it was, I believe, over $700,000 to do HVAC and IT. The request was to remove the IT portion, just focus on the HVAC portion here. So I've just simply highlighted that we've reduced the total. And that 373 is what was in the initial information that came over to me, that it would cost them to implement this piece.
that's what we heard earlier today, that it would be $100,000 instead. Did we ever get that answer?
Well, we don't have an answer yet. What we're doing is, so we had testimony today which contradicted this number. Did you send the report? I sent you her email. Have you been in contact with that witness? It was Sarah Truckle.
I have not heard back yet.
But you sent her.
I sent her a copy of it.
Right. So Cameron, her testimony from the person who's in charge of it, and she mentioned the 100,000 number. And I said, well, it was more like 300,000 or some 100,000. And she said, I said we would provide to her what we had and she would get back to us and CCU.
I have an email from Sarah Truckle at 103. I can get back to her. It appears that what I have here in this email is a bottom line of total 233 to 373. So
In that case, we can't deal with the range.
Okay.
it says the startup would be 100,000, but then there's another line item that says student tuition and certification cost sponsorship of 133 to 273. So
200, so it'd be 373,000, which is where that number
That's the
is.
number in
Okay.
here, yeah.
That makes sense.
so
Okay, I think then it would be good. Tom, could you just close the loop with her and tell her, since we're not gonna deal with the range, we're gonna just put
Okay.
the appropriation in. Okay.
okay. Next change is just under the sub 3 here, where I've had to up the sum on line 11 because we have added at the top of page 30. And this is information that came to me yesterday. I believe it was based on testimony that you took yesterday morning, was including $500,000 granted to the 5 NeighborWorks America affiliated homeownership centers for the purpose of providing home buyer education, financial literacy, counseling, and foreclosure prevention programs. So this would go through Department of Housing and Community Development to these entities. I will say there's no parameters here around if there are 5 of these centers, who gets what. So I'm assuming that Department of Housing and Community Development could determine who is getting how much under the program, and they would have the total latitude to do that based on the simple language you have here. If you want something different, shall be, equally 100,000 to each of them, et cetera, then we would need to add that in.
Joe?
Never mind. This red.
The trick, I think it might have moved beyond where my brain was at, but, just to note that, when I about the sum for Mont State College system, there's a second possibility that I might be able to put some language to, that addresses some of the areas that VSC does not.
That would be great.
For workforce
What
development.
are you thinking, the
The high school.
technical centers?
The tech centers, and there's a training program, the General Contractors Association, which is a nonprofit, offers that could definitely use more staffing because they travel to the tech centers, to employers. The person I talked to today had 100 training events scheduled in the next 3 months and could use twice as many people and publicity, basically outreach publicity to make people aware of this, but they're addressing some of the elements of construction and carpentry that VSC addresses those areas that require certifications to HVAC, plumbing, and electricity, but not general construction, and a lot of the wider OSHA requirements that they all have to have training for. So there's a very efficient, very active model that we might be able to get behind. So I'll have more information coming up. That's just a heads up.
Well, let's talk about that. What do you think your timing is? I mean, normally what we do is we take an idea like that and give it to Cam to write up, but
Okay.
I think sooner rather than later is important, particularly if it involves funding, because we want to put the funding. I'm going to draft a very rough draft of a funding letter for discussions immediately.
Okay.
I mean,
Which
it doesn't have to be in the bill. I guess it's not the end of the world if we say we'll put tiers of recommendation.
Okay.
And if we say, well, our second tier includes this, and, we put in one number and then it turns out when we get to the bill, it's somewhat different. It's not the end of the world.
I talked to the person who runs the instruction program this morning, and I'll talk to the director of AGC. One over down here. I'll give him a call, see if we can work some approximation out.
Great. That's good. Also, have you been in touch with VHCB? Because the appropriation to them is gonna be bigger than any of these, and we need to have language.
No, that is what I was gonna conclude with, is leaving the conversation from yesterday. You all heard, I believe, from PHC yesterday morning, and I haven't had the capacity to go back and review that yet or discuss with them, which is what I would try to close this afternoon. To get their funding needs, so I can insert it here into the appropriation section.
I
Go
have a
ahead.
question about that. I would like you to tell us what's in section 88 of 2024 acts and resolves 181.
Sure. Would be more than happy to.
Thank you.
And I apologize, I had it up yesterday and we didn't get to it, so I don't have it up electronically. However, I have it here. I'd be happy to share a copy with you so you have it. For those who are at home and want to find this, it is in Act 181. It is section 88 as referenced there. So this is it is a session law program, and it has the Agency of Human Services shall work in coordination with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to develop the Resident Services Program for the purpose of distributing funds to eligible affordable housing organizations to respond to timely and urgent resident needs and aid with housing retention. And so then it says, an eligible affordable housing organization is a Vermont-based nonprofit or public housing organization that makes available at least 15% of its affordable housing portfolio to or a Vermont-based nonprofit that provides substantial services to families and individuals experiencing homelessness, including those who require service support or rental assistance. So that subsection B is just defining what affordable housing organizations are eligible for the funding. But it sounds like the funding itself is to respond to timely and urgent resident needs and aid with housing retention. I don't know what that means or what they're doing with the funding. You would need to have probably VHCB in to discuss who they've given the money to and what they've used it for.
I would really like to know what they've used it for before we grant them another $6 million. Not that I'm suspicious of it. Here again, I want to make sure that it's going to the people who need it most in the whole state.
Can you send that copy?
It's, yeah. Can you send me?
Yes.
Right, I think. All right, so we need more testimony by VHCB, because it's them, it's not AHS. AHS is just the granting entity on their resident services program.
Yep.
Magali, did you get that?
Could you repeat that, please?
Uh-huh. We are going to need more testimony from VHCB on their resident services program. How do they use the money? What do they do? How much have they spent so far? How would they use an extra $6 million? Right?
I also have just the wording question of it. I'm trying to understand, does this say that you're giving money to the Agency of Human Services and then they're giving it to VHCB for their
Right.
programs, or you're giving it to VHCB and they're going to grant it through the agencies?
It's language that I've seen throughout, so it's similar to the language up here to VHFA. The money has to go to, I'm scrolling too much, apologies. Here, the Department of Housing and Community Development, which then grants the money to VHFA in these instances. And so this would be similar. It's going to the Agency of Human Services to then be granted to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board.
And I assume we don't know why that is.
I can't give you a full answer. My understanding is the money has to go to a state entity to then be given out.
Oh, that's, okay, that's what it is. Okay.
And VHCB,
They're quasi.
they're an instrumentality of the state, but they are not a state agency.
So it has to go to,
So is that money given to them in one lump sum, or they have to?
I don't know. Well,
Don't we
that's a
give-
question for them.
Don't we give
I'm hearing
VHCB a
from
pile of money?
VHFA on the sideline here, it's a lump sum.
It's a lump sum, they don't have to write a grant for it.
Does the sideline introduce itself for a moment so I can answer? question.
Ed Simmons with Vermont Housing Finance Agency. I can only speak to how VHFA receives funding. So VHFA does not receive appropriations from state government. We, depending on what the grant or the program is, we receive it. The money is appropriated to state agencies. And then we go under contract with that respective state agency to receive the funding. So for the programs in here, that would be through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. For VHCB, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure if Chris knows the answer to any of these questions, but you might want to ask Chris or VHCB directly how they receive their funding for this particular program.
Or why, it's probably, I think the whole thing is probably because it has to go to a state agency. And both VHFA and the HCB are not literally state agencies. They're instrumentalities of the state.
But we also we don't directly send money to VHFA, but we do directly send money to VHCB.
I think we do, but I don't know.
Statutorily, we do.
You know what?
I don't know.
Let's ask them.
Yeah, let's.
If you want me to help clarify. Chris Donnelly, Champlain Health Trust. The reason, this is a program that has not been funded by the state. There has been no money that's been given by the state to fund the activity that Cameron just described.
Talking about the resident service.
Resident services. They have received charitable dollars.
Right, which is a
Development
$3 million
program. We talked about this
charitable
yesterday.
dollars, yeah.
Last Friday, you had a witness in one of our housing developments who spoke about her experience having the brain injury and homelessness, and so forth. She's supported by people that are funded through programs like this. This language was passed in Act 181 last year as an opportunity to say, okay, we have this program, if there's money available, let's fund it. There wasn't money available at the end, the language still passed. You do end up funding VHB directly with your general fund and maybe other special funds. The reason why the Agency of Human Service was mentioned here is because you wanted, last year, the legislature wanted to make sure that the agency was working with the HCB to ensure that the services were, the program was designed to provide the services for the people in need.
Not for brick and mortar.
Yes, and it was designed to be in coordination with folks that AHS serves. But the agencies that VHCB works with were going to be the grant recipients. Does that clarify?
Yes.
and so the language passed, but the
But the
money
money did not
did
pass.
not pass.
So they're not sitting, they have some charitable money that is being given to them over 3 years. But they're not sitting on a pile of money, and they just have only funded 10 positions out of this.
That's right. We had testimony on this issue where, remember, it was the 10 positions, what they do with that. Would you like additional testimony? And we can have Gus come back in and describe the program. Or try to provide more detail if you like.
Yeah, right. It wasn't, yeah. And now I'm recalling what, because it wasn't, it didn't match up with 14 counties. That was the program that didn't match up to the 14 counties.
Yes, the 10 resident service coordinators.
I think if you want to think about it for a few minutes, we can easily come back to us and I mean, we can get Gus back in here. For 10 minutes or whatever.
When would be an opportunity to talk about things that I think are missing?
I think things that are missing, we should talk about as soon as we.
If I may though, my colleague Kirby is here. And
Oh, yeah.
I'd ask
I
him
didn't
to
think
join us
right now,
around.
I know that,
Right.
I just
Okay.
meant in general, I would like some opportunity
We need to
of
talk
myself,
about
or if
what's
there's
missing.
members of the committee that have some ideas of some things that we might like to float to the committee that we could be in this or attach.
I think we should do that very soon.
I agree.
And the reason is I unfortunately had just a little too much to do with what's in here. And I don't trust myself. I mean,
No,
so many, no, listen, so many ideas have come across
Sure,
the transom.
Right, of
I'm the first one to admit that either something just got lost.
course.
And then there are others that never came across the transom. So I really think that the next time we
We could
have,
have a committee discussion and
committee
kind of just,
discussion,
if there's things people want to flag that might get attached or missing.
right.
What is our
um,
actual time frame for this, Bill? What's your goal?
Okay,
Get it out by March 11th.
we have to get it out by March 11th.
Okay, so we'll be working on it next week as well.
Yes, I would like to get it. I would like to have consensus and a straw vote by next Friday.
Okay.
Because we really think about it,
Our pro letter is here.
Yep.
We're off here.
the whole week we're
So
off.
this is our drop dead date.
See, because
Our preps letter
put
is
your
on.
finger on the 14th. Put your finger on the 14th. That's crossover.
No, that's.
See, in other words, here.
We have to give them enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, but more importantly, the next Friday is the deadline for the
Money bills.
money bills. So we need to get it out of here to give the money committees the time.
But we could have a soft goal of the appropriations letter, to know what we want and how we want to prioritize.
Right. What I'm hoping, remember the appropriations letter, and we'll get to you, Kirby. Actually, why don't we have Kirby first, and then we'll talk about our process and what
Okay.
we're gonna do. Is that okay? All right, because I'm not gonna forget. Kirby,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, orient back to, you're gonna be talking about sales and use tax. We have this kind of placeholder. Kirby's gonna walk through Rep. Harley's language,
Okay.
but that's, it's intended to go in here. It's just not here yet.
Proposal failed in use tax. It is.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kirby Keaton, Legislative Counsel. I handle the tax portfolio for the office, for those who don't know. And I haven't discussed it with the chair before, but he taught me land transactions and so there's connection there.
So you all think I've just been blowing smoke, right?
If I say anything wrong about land transactions.
How did you hear that?
Oh, yeah, it's funny.
All right. So Kirby, we have at least one tax proposal. There might be others that have been floating around that didn't make it here. But
I had planned to talk about some language I put together for Representative Bartley. As I understand it, that's what is wanted. And also to let you know about some similar things in the existing law. Just kind of know where maybe a starting point for you.
Great.
Okay. So starting first.
Where are you? Page what?
Well, we
One.
don't, we have.
Oh, we don't have
any.
we don't, this is a,
No, I don't know if you have this. This has not been introduced.
Okay.
right.
All right.
So this is just some language that has not been introduced at this point. But it's language that would exempt all building materials and building supplies from sales and use tax for 2 years.
What, you said 3?
For 3 years. It's so it would sunset after 3 years. So we have on the screen that you're looking at, all tax expenditures. So a sales tax exemption would be a tax expenditure, has to have a statutory purpose. What I've done is modify an existing sales tax exemption that is for manufacturing. And there's limitations on that exemption, but since if we exempted all of these things, we wouldn't need that other exemption anymore. I just modified that existing exemption. So that's why it might look a little funny. So I'm modifying the statutory purpose for that exemption to say that the purpose of this is to reduce the cost of construction in Vermont. And then we take the existing sales tax exemption, which is for building materials that are used in building a manufacturing facility that exceed $1 million of sales.
Real quick. I thought this was a bill that you had.
It is. So
What's going on here? Are we looking at a bill or is
So-
this getting attached?
So this came up, the chair and I talked about it, and we thought maybe using it for affordable housing only. But that came up after I requested the bill.
So is this a bill?
It will be introduced on the floor in the next week. But we
Okay,
said
this
that-
is confusing.
Well, it's an added possible.
Right,
item.
but I thought we weren't talking about it. It is confusing.
We're saying this language might be used in this bill, if it's something.
One of the
in my
things,
house.
one of the things that I've referred to is
Section
Whether-
7.
whether we should have, and it was in here, but without any language, was should we have some sort of sales tax exemption for construction materials? And it turns out that there is a bill and they've been working on language.
I just didn't want Kimberly to have to reinvent the wheel.
So it's
So you're
adding this
add
to
this
the
to
bill
our
on
housing
section
bill.
7.
Well, we could
Or considering it.
consider.
I see.
Okay, so returning to the language, I'll keep it higher level because I understand you kind of are thinking about this conceptually anyway. There's an existing exemption for sales of building materials and supplies that exceed $1 million to build manufacturing facilities. This modifies that so that all building materials and supplies would be exempt for 3 years. And then after 3 years, it would revert back to the existing exemption,
So at any level, not $1 million or higher.
just across the state for anybody.
Like if I want to repair my back stairs,
Correct.
I'm good.
Correct. It would just, the retailers would just not charge tax anymore for those things if this became law. Currently, the way that this one exemption works is, I used to work at the Department of Taxes doing policy and legal stuff there. And dealt with this once. There was a taxpayer who was interested in using this exemption. It doesn't get used very often at all. In that case, we just had them send $60,000, because that would be the sales tax on $1 million, to the department. And then they just used an exemption certificate for everything they did for their project. So that's how this current exemption ends up functioning, or it has in the past with the department.
So it's a reimbursement?
No, that was just a way to administratively do it easier,
Okay.
is instead of trying to track up to $1 million, just have them pay the tax on $1 million up front, and then just use an exemption certificate for the entire project. So that's this existing exemption. There's another I could talk about unless we are not ready to move on.
Real quick.
Yeah.
So in that model you just mentioned,
Mhm.
is that, and I'm sorry because numbers are, that's where I asked a lot of questions. That exemption, does, you said to pay the upfront, so they are, the exemption is the full price, but they're gonna pay something but upfront?
No, I'm sorry if I was
I'm sorry.
confusing, because I went
I
back,
got
I went
lost.
between this proposal and current law. This
Okay.
proposal would be no tax on building materials and supplies, and there's definitions for that.
Okay,
Okay, so that's simple, right?
that's this,
For 3 years.
For 3 years, and then it would sunset.
Mm-hmm.
okay,
I was also speaking about current law so that you're aware
oh,
that for manufacturing facilities, there's an exemption for building materials and supplies that cost more than $1 million. So when the project is very large and runs over $1 million in building materials and supplies purchased, then this exemption that's in current law could be used. And I was just explaining how
How
it's
they do
used
it.
in reality. Yeah.
and how they do that is to pay that bit upfront
For the first
for
million.
the first million.
When I've worked on this in the past, that's how. it was
That's
done.
how, okay, thank you, thank you.
And, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I am not, you did a wonderful job. I am not married to any of this. It just came up from lots of conversations I've had over the summer. and I'm not a tax expert. It was just what's come up.
So one thing I want to make you aware of on that note is so that you all are aware that 100% of the sales tax revenue goes to the education fund.
That's what I was just gonna ask about. So how would we replace? I guess that's the next question is how would we replace?
You wouldn't, but I do want to make you aware of where
You wouldn't.
this tax, whatever cost is associated with this tax expenditure would be off of the ed fund.
I guess, couple questions. If we wanted, I'm just saying, if we wanted to have a sales tax exemption that applied only to affordable housing projects for 3 years, and we weren't interested necessarily in expanding the existing exemption in any way, let's say the $1 million for commercial, that's over here, we're not messing with that. If we just wanted to have a sales tax exemption for 3 years, I guess to have a sunset and see how it goes, and it saves maybe 8% of the construction materials. Could we do that? Would that be hard to draft? It just wouldn't look like that, would it?
No, so there's another existing exemption, which I'm going to show you here.
Okay.
Which was probably going to be a better fit. This isn't
You
a,
might want to see if you can make it a little bigger for some of us who are at the other end of the.
Do you have any data on how much goes into the ed fund currently for
sales tax.
from sales and use?
I can only tell you very roughly that it's
Not insignificant.
not insignificant.
It's a lot of
Especially
money.
during a
JFO would be able to tell you exact numbers,
It's
but
many tens of millions of dollars.
it's.
So how do you
Especially during a
replace
pandemic.
that money? If you're not getting it from the sales tax, if there was an exemption
This would
for
be,
3
this would be a
years.
fraction. I mean, it's not just building materials and supplies. It's like everything with the sales tax.
Sales on all
Okay,
things.
So
okay.
sales tax is
So is
imposed
that
on.
fraction insignificant?
We would have to ask JFO.
I think, yeah, JFO would have to figure that out. And as far as I know, they haven't been asked to look into that.
Okay, if you can't make it bigger, don't,
I figured it out.
okay.
Yeah.
Bigger?
Yeah, that's
yeah.
good.
Okay.
Fresh
All right.
flowers.
We're not gonna talk about fresh cut flowers. We're gonna talk about the building material supplies this is the entity-based exemptions for sales tax, and there are exemptions for certain entities. So if,
I see.
yeah, so under this, sales of building materials and supplies that are to the state of Vermont or the US government exempt. 501c3s and 501c5s, which are agriculture related. If they're used exclusively for the purpose of the exempt status. And then local development corporations.
So you could add a provision here.
So we could add something here that sounds more like what you have in mind.
Yes.
And there's existing definitions for affordable housing kind of all over the place in statute with different variations. There's one that I'm aware of in a property tax context that's about true affordable housing, like Section 5 housing and that kind of thing. But if you're looking at more of like middle income housing, we'd have to look into other definitions that exist. But we could figure something out if you let me know, like what do you mean by affordable in this case?
This is like a whole committee decision. It's not just mine.
Right.
I'm very sympathetic to wanting to lean only affordable. I think I would like to see middle income because, you know, we are hearing that every type of housing besides the McMansions are really what we're looking for.
What if we were to say, in a
AMI
rough draft,
20%.
Yeah.
what if we were to say that we're projects, that housing development, which was subject to subsidies from VHFA or VHCB of applicable to 120% of AMI or something like that.
I can say as someone who used to work at the Department of Taxes, what they're going to want, the feedback that I would assume that they would give you would be something that they can quickly verify and check, not something that's going to require an investigation on their part.
Yeah.
So I would keep that in mind.
Well, that's a separate problem from however we define it. Are you suggesting, for example, that it would be applicable to affordable housing developments certified by VHCB or VHFA to the Department of Taxes as 120% of AMI or below? You want them to certify?
Assuming those other agencies are already doing that, or if it's an easy burden or lift for them, then something like that, I think, could be a path to making something workable here. Yeah.
I'm seeing like potential, like that.
I'm seeing heads nodding all over the place. I think.
Everybody looking at Chris.
What I would like to do, because I'm just trying at this point, guys, to get legislation in front of us
Yes.
to look at. So what I would ask Chad, I would ask both of you guys to, Chris, Chad, to work with, Kirby and get the language that we need, okay? Right, and then we can run it by
And-
VHCB to make sure they're okay, but I think.
Shouldn't we decide whether we agree in principle first?
Well-
Well, and in order to decide on that, I would want the data that JFO could provide, and that could just be a email, submitted.
But I think that we should get the language in front of us, but I think we need to know what kind of money are we talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no way that I will back something that is gonna burden the ed fund. Absolutely not. It's non-starter for me. If it's significant. Why we either are here or aren't here, what?
What does significant mean?
Well, if we're gonna take $10 million away from the ed fund. And not, I mean, if we're gonna take $10 million away from the ed fund, is this really the highest priority? Because it's gotta be it's gotta be a pretty high priority to take away from the ed fund. Is this the highest priority that we wanna put our efforts behind it?
right.
I think we really
I
need
think
to
that's a
weigh it.
perfectly legitimate question. I think we should have some data.
And we
Okay,
could maybe put in bumpers of like, we will allow up to this much, and once people have applied for that abatement or whatever we want to call it, whatever the tax break is called, then like, that's as much as.
is that administratable?
Could you clarify?
In other words, Leonora is saying, what if we were to saying up to so much money?
For the total expenditure of the exemption?
You wouldn't know what the sales were.
I think I would think it's a question for the Department of Taxes to see whether they would be able to track that. It's
Okay, that's
possible.
an additional question for the Department of Taxes when they come and testify. I do think we need the data on the effect. And let's see what it is.
I would say that I think JFO is going to need some language to base an estimate off of. So I think that might be a good step, is to narrow it down to the size of the exemption or what the requirements are, so that JFO has something to work with.
And what are the current exemptions again in this proposed item?
Nonprofits and
Nonprofits, government, local development corporations, and then also for manufacturing, but that one's for only the costs over $1 million.
Okay. So these others already have this exemption.
Right.
For the buildings.
but it is a major contribution. I don't have the numbers, but it's many tens of millions of dollars. Also, of course, I don't know what this will look like in the future, depending on whatever structure we use for funding education. But when anything is taken out of the ed fund, it's simply replaced with more property tax.
Mhm.
So it's property tax paying for it. That's
Right.
all it is.
Mhm.
And if some property tax goes up. If it's, that's the problem is, and if it comes out of the general fund, well, then it's income tax paying for it. One way or another, it's paid for.
Yep.
And I think you've put the question right, which is the use important enough to merit that reality? I mean, it's not as if, just to clarify, under existing law, it is not as if X trillion dollars or X billion dollars, excuse me, X billion dollars are available to the schools, and we're going to take
A smidge.
10 million away from that, and they'll just have to suck it up. It doesn't work that way. It just means the taxpayers have to, it just adds a little bit, little tiny bit to the tax bill, along with a lot of other things that we do with the ed fund.
Or you could remove the exemptions and send them to the ed fund and lower property taxes.
You could do what?
Remove the exemptions that are currently in
You
place.
could.
And earmark that for education.
Well, it would automatically,
And lower
it would be
property.
automatic. We could take out the $1 million commercial tax. We could omit that. That's right.
I mean, I'm just saying, there's,
The businesses in Vermont need employees more than they need buildings right now.
You know, but you're absolutely right. I'm just logistically, the Joe theory is true.
I'm just seeing if somebody clips that.
We could take something out. And have the Chamber of Commerce in here and see what they think. Excuse me. All right. Is there, can you work on drafting something up, working with them? So we have what, just the language. I really want to get the language out there and into a draft bill, and we can take it out if we don't like it. We can add to it. We can do whatever we want.
Have someone, yeah, I'll connect with them.
Let's see, I'm just looking at the tax stuff. The downtown and village tax credit expansion, that's over in Commerce. And it's in the governor's budget.
My understanding is it's in the BAA and that it's in, actually, I don't know if it's in BAA. It's in your bill, right?
It's not anymore because we were told we were told it's in the budget.
Okay, okay.
We might.
So it might be in the BAA. It's currently also in the miscellaneous tax bill, but I don't think Ways and Means plans to keep it in there. So, you
I
know,
think they want to take it out. They don't want to extend it.
they just want to leave it to a more appropriate committee. They don't, that tax credit's seen as more development related.
And new home buyer, first generation home buyer tax credit extension is in our bill.
Yes.
Okay, increased charitable, okay. Has anybody talked at all about increasing charitable tax credit for donated housing sites?
I have not talked to Kirby about that yet, no.
My understanding, which is very minimal, is that this is just an example of idea. I'm just running through ideas.
Love it. Yep, I love it.
For some, I'm unaware of it, but apparently people donate land for housing and can get a tax credit under existing law, and it's limited to like 5 million. And the question was, should we expand it?
Property,
What?
given how much property costs now.
Yeah, and how there's just encouraging people to devote land to a productive housing use. That's the theory behind this. Kirby, could you look into that?
Yeah, that sounds like it's one of those.
What are they donated to?
I don't know. I know nothing more than, I just said everything I know.
I think it's land trust, it's land trust.
They could. I just.
Or-
Okay, so they would go to a land trust or.
I know someone just donated land to UVM, so like,
Depends what you
people
want.
donate land to.
So, and to encourage
Yeah.
that, we have a charitable tax credit donation. So Kirby, could you look into that?
Yes, and is this based off language that Cameron has already?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Okay. Let me make sure I make a note.
Kirby, if you want, I'll give you a copy of this. I got to.
Okay.
It's got it.
Right now, I'm unclear whether we're talking about one of those deep, obscure Vermont tax credits, which we have some of those buried at the end of the income tax chapter, or whether we're just talking about the federal charitable deduction, which I don't think we are talking about that.
We are, it's no abuse.
No, I mean, it could be. I mean, it has nothing to do with Vermont, but if you itemize your taxes and you donated some land to a charitable organization, then you could take, I think it's 50% of the value of that off.
Right, but we can't affect federal law, so there's no sense in worrying about it if it's merely.
So that you're aware that a person can get a benefit for doing that federally though. So.
Anything else for Kirby at this point? What you're looking, kind of like. expectant.
No, good.
Just, now I know what you look like when you're engaged. Okay.
He's been looking at that for the last 20 minutes. If you want.
I'll remember that. I'm except that, we have a new position, if you know John Gray, he's working on ed finance, which I was doing last year,
Right.
but he's taking a little bit of that off my plate, but pretty much everything else tax related. Me,
Okay, everything tax related except ed finance.
yeah, but
Okay,
even the property valuation stuff I'm doing currently.
okay. I have another question for you. It's
Please.
similar in line of questioning, but it's not for housing, but one of our constituents asked a question about, because we talk about property ownership, taxes, all of those things. And some of my rural constituents were questioning about land use for credits for not environmental preservation. So like for either clearing their land for housing use or not, vice versa, so either way, or like depending on what the state needs. And I'm trying to remember the conversation, but it was a very long time ago. But it was something along the lines of, we are doing what the state is asking us to do, but we're not getting a benefit for it. And so I'll have to talk to you about that at a separate time. So
Sure.
I just please know I'm gonna make a connection with you about that.
Got it.
That was just a verbal note so that it's on my radar and on yours.
Okay. Anytime, reach out.
Just thinking that you just triggered a memory and I did get it, but any other, I haven't got it. It just went out in my head and out. Are there, not an uncommon occurrence, are there other questions of Kirby before we release him and return to a discussion of our own internal process? Okay, so Kirby, at this point, we're looking to you to work out some language that could be inserted here with the understanding it's one more thing for us to think about. And also to get, Kirby, is it you who can get to us the numbers of that people are looking for? Or JF, do we need JFO?
If it's all right with the committee, I will, once I figure out the sales tax exemption with the other agency folks, share that right away with JFO so they can be aware of it and start looking at an estimate for you.
Yeah, and I'm curious, I guess what I would like to know, which is just very basic. A, what is the contribution of the sales tax to the ed fund overall? B, how much does the ed fund, how much is taken out of the ed fund for the other exemptions?
I think that Ted Barnett at JFO could easily answer those questions. He works on sales tax and he also works on the tax expenditure report where he's supposed to estimate each of these tax expenditures.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have Ted in, but do you think that I'm just trying to make things quicker and easier for us. Is this the kind of thing where you can talk to Ted and because you're going to be in here all the time?
I will tell him that you're looking for information on this.
Okay,
And
and these.
that he can reach out.
Just email it email it to me and Magali, and then she'll submit it to the, I mean, this isn't it's not disputed.
I'll let Ted know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell him to email.
Yeah, I mean, it's not disputed. This is just facts that he could dig up for us. Yeah.
I would also, in addition to the full contribution of sales tax to the ed fund, I'd really, if it's possible to carve out exactly what we're talking about, the construction materials, I'd really love to see that in particular.
Yeah, I assumed that.
Yeah.
That's a given, that he's gonna try to give us an estimate. Maybe it would start with, well, what is the sales tax value on all construction materials? You start there and
Yeah.
what,
He'll be able to, I'm sorry, he'll be able to share with you the current exemptions and what they cost. He'll be able to do that, I think, easily. And then with this new exemption, I think he'll be able to figure out an estimate for you for that as well.
Great. Yes, Tom.
Just another piece of the puzzle we might consider is that the materials are generally not the lion's share of construction costs. Their labor is. So the question is 3%, or 6%, sorry, if the sales tax is gathered on $100,000 worth of materials that then turns into $1 million on the grand list, does that $1 million contribute more or less to the ed fund than the amount of the sales tax that we're taking out? It might actually be a net gain. But it might take a year for construction to actually happen.
Absolutely. It's sort of
It
like,
might actually be a net gain over the course of the
Yep.
year.
but I also think that's the kind of analysis that we rarely see as legislators. Or I rarely
Well,
see.
it's, that's a construction cost versus grand list value versus whatever what do we call
This
it?
goes to the larger issue,
Yeah.
which is debated, but I think
Yeah.
I don't want to keep Kirby much longer because
Yeah, I don't think.
we only have about 15 minutes before floor. And I think we want to talk a little about our process.
Mhm.
Thank you, Kirby. Appreciate it. Okay, so where were we?
Good job.
You, Elizabeth, what were you raising? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
God. And you still remember?
Yeah, hang on, let me find the page. I just was looking for a time frame of like, if.
Oh, right.
When we've had a great overview, we've spent some time discussing some of the details, but I want to know what the final day to discuss details is so that I can kind of,
All right, I can.
Reverse engineer.
I'm gonna attempt this. I'm gonna attempt this. Okay. But I think it's a really important question because I want the committee to know where we're going.
Mhm.
Okay. Absolute drop dead. You have to have a vote on the bill out of committee by March 11th. And I don't think ideally, that's what happens is we, as of the end of next week, we're out of here for a week.
Yeah.
And so ideally, I would like us to know where we're going on Friday before we leave. In other words, we can do a straw vote, see, do we have a problem? Where are we? What the issues are? We could even do, we can discuss it as we go, but I really would, on that Friday, like us to have pretty much the final bill. And everybody looking at it and talking about it and seeing where we're at.
The 28th.
Yeah, the end of this month, the last day of February. That is a week from tomorrow.
and then I was saying that maybe we could have a soft deadline of Wednesday, since that's the day we have our appropriations letter out.
Right, so. What about the appropriations letter? The appropriations letter should contain by priority. It doesn't have to be like, it's not like that. Let's say there's 50, I'm just throwing numbers out. Say there's 15 items that we've considered that have appropriation. We don't have to have a first choice, second choice, third choice, all the way to 15, but we do need some prioritization. But I know from my experience on the Appropriations Committee, they're not happy when they just get, oh, we want it all, here it is, and then, which is essentially saying, you decide. You decide. So what I'm thinking is we do categories, priority 1 category, priority 2, priority 3, et cetera. That letter has to go out on Wednesday. Next. We could go out at the end of the day, as long as it goes out. I am going to try to get to everybody a rough draft of the letter. I was hoping I could do it by Friday, end of the day. I just don't know if I'm gonna have enough time to do it. Part of what I wanted to do was get a better sense from appropriations of sort of how much we have to play with. But I'm getting the impression that they are less concerned about the total amount, which is sort of in the $100 million range, than how much is not already in the governor's budget. So our letter will call that out for each item. Is this in the governor's budget? For how much? You know, that kind of thing. So I think I'm gonna just take a crack at a letter which has amounts in it. I'm just gonna bite the bullet. I'm just gonna go like that and just put it all out there for people to look at and say, are you out of your mind? Or whatever people are gonna say. And I can explain my rationale, and I'm gonna try to get that to everybody. If I can't get it close of business Friday, I'll do it over the weekend and have it to you over the weekend, okay? We're moving into a period where we may have to stay late, we may have to start early, we may have to work on Mondays. You know, we're up against it. This is our big push. Once we make crossover, and if we can get the bill out of here, onto the floor, and voted out, then we'll get the Senate bill from Allison Clarkson's committee, Commerce, their Housing and Commerce. So they're like these two combined. And they have half the time we do. They only meet on the mornings or the afternoons. And so their bill will come us.
Do you know what's in the bill?
I don't really know yet. I know what Allison would like to be in our bill, and a lot of it's different, but a lot of it's the same. There's nothing wrong that if it's in both bills, that's okay. Then what we will do is we'll take her bill and our bill and kind of try to put it all together in a way that's acceptable to her committee, because we don't want to send a bill back to the Senate that gets killed. I also don't particularly want to pass a bill out of the House that is, I mean, I think the problem with passing the bill out of the House in this climate, if it's a split vote, a totally split vote, and then subject to veto, we haven't done anything. So we're gonna have to try to put something together that works. And if we can't, we can't. I mean, but we got to get something out of here. So that's the timing. Every day, Magali has provided, I'm sorry, I have a friend named Magali has provided and is providing in the schedule that will, as a general matter, we'll take testimony in the morning and have talking time in the afternoon. So we just have plenty of talking time, to the point where if we don't need it anymore and we're sick of each other, we can just stop talking and vote. But I think we're gonna really try to have plenty of room to talk. Yes.
Is there room to split the difference and do the testimony and then talking, but do some in the testimony in the morning, then conversation, and then we'll do the afternoon testimony early and then conversation?
We can do that.
Is that,
We can do
is that
whatever we want.
optional,
No.
or is it gonna be all testimony and then we process?
We can do what we need to do. I think
I think with the intensity of everything that's gonna be
Right.
coming in, things can get meld really quickly.
right.
But we don't
forget-
have to, that's just,
Well, no,
a
there's
question.
two examples that are really important. One is where somebody says, you know, I'm not comfortable with this. I'd like more information, like you two just said.
Mhm.
We have to be able to get somebody in here.
yeah.
If it's in
And
the
then do
middle
it
of our
later.
conversation, fine. We'll get them in here when we get them in here and give them a chance. I mean, don't hesitate. If you're saying, I'm not too comfortable, I need to know this, or I need to know that. That's one thing. Another is, as Emily said, what about all the ideas that aren't in here that are coming across the transom? Well, we need to get to them. And because we may need witnesses. What I did, remember, we have seen a lot of witnesses, right? Before even this week, we've had a lot of witnesses. What I did last weekend is I went through my list, which is not assuredly complete, I went through and I broke it out by issues and I asked myself, have we heard enough testimony? And if not, who do we have to hear testimony from? So we have a list, like when Alex comes here, we have like 5 things we want him to talk about. It's all the sort of pieces. Well, if there's a new idea, we have to make sure that we've heard. We can, but we don't want to adopt a piece of legislation where there's something in it that it's just because we like it. We have to have testimony to support it. But it's up to us and our council to turn those ideas into legislation, which is why you hear me asking everybody, you get this language on that? That's why. So, yes.
Before we go through one last more protocol thing, thank you for that, and I appreciate that. And also, I just want to just put in the air, I think process-wise, as we're going forward, is it an option for us to give you information and things go like we did today? Because I think there might have been something come up with a process conversation just now, like with, because that is a possible bill, but it could be possible language. And there's things that are missing that need to get inserted. So is now, like, we have cram time, so now is that an option? Like, you're open for folks to give language and we can process through and decide as a committee outside of the, where that, like, how that language comes from? Like, is that okay? Because I think, perfect.
I mean, listen, this is our bill.
Yeah.
We are free to put anything in it that we want to put in it, regardless of whether some other bill has got some language that's similar or dissimilar or whatever, whether the language is put together because it came out of our head and Cameron put it into words, or whether it came out of some other bill, some bill from last year, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we want it. If we want it and we agree on it, it's in.
Thank you.
The only thing I have to clear is that we don't put things in it that will force our bill to march around this building to the point where it will never get out.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
anything else? Tomorrow morning, we start tomorrow at House floors at 9:30. We will start at 10. Okay, and hopefully floor will not be too long. If it is, we'll just push that. We'll push everything back, but we will hear Josh Hanford from Vermont League of Cities and Towns, Samantha Sheehan will hear, and then break, and then we're having Alex and Chris Cochran in for lunch, okay? Great, everyone, can we depart?
Yes.
We are adjourned.
I think she went to